So, comic book friends, great to be speaking with you. Happy 2021. My name is Jordan Clays, and I'm here on behalf of Lousy With. And joining me this evening, I'm very excited to welcome David Pepose.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be back on the show and excited to talk about my new book, Scout's Honor.
Oh, couldn't be more excited. And as you said, we are here to speak about Scout's Honor. For anyone who isn't familiar with David's work, he is the incredibly talented creator and writer behind titles like Spencer and Locke, Going to the Chapel. He just recently launched his debut Kickstarter called the OZ, which is fantastic. And like he said, we're here today to talk about Scout's Honor.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to chat about it. For those who haven't read Scout's Honor, it just came out the previous Wednesday, January 6th. It's the story of years after a nuclear war, a cult has risen from the ashes, and their Bible is an old Boy Scout manual. And our story follows Kit, a young initiate who really represents the best of the values of the Ranger Scouts of America. There's just one problem. This is a hyper-masculine survivalist cult that only allows men to serve. And so Kit has had to conceal her identity as a woman in order to pursue what she considers her true calling as a Ranger Scout. Unfortunately, Kit's going to make a pretty chilling discovery that cuts all the way back to the Ranger Scouts' creation. And she's going to find herself losing her religion as she embarks on a dangerous quest for the truth. So I've been describing this as like Fallout meets Mulan, but there are hints of things like The Handmaid's Tale, Planet of the Apes, and The Hunger Games thrown in for good measure.
100%. And, another thing that I even that kind of touched on me when I first started reading it, it even has some Shakespearean elements. It's almost like Viola in Twelfth Night, kind of like the whole, like the concealing of the identity, trying to pretend that you're something that you're not.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I wanted to kind of, and you've touched on so many of the things that I kind of wanted to ask you, which is great.
Sure.
But let's just kind of start, because you've already kind of mentioned that this is kind of their Bible. So let's kind of dive right into the kind of topic of religion here, because as soon as you look at this book, you don't even have to open the pages. You can see that there's the allusion to Moses with the Ten Commandments, and we've got Hancock holding the tablets of the kind of Boy Scout creed.
Yeah.
So why was it that, I guess you weren't looking to mince words. You wanted to know or people to know right away that this was sort of an allegory for a religion, or your commentary on religion of sorts, I suppose?
Yeah. So much of this story sprung from my own spiritual and political reawakening when I left home. I was raised in a pretty conservative house in Missouri, both politically and religiously. I'm a practicing Jew, raised pretty strictly Jewish growing up. And so much of this story was about, when I left home, there were a lot of pillars that I thought to be that really held up my worldview. And when I left, I realized they were not quite as ironclad as I had thought. There were different ways to look at the world. And that can be disorienting for sure, And so then you have to kind of really figure out, how do I maintain my values and the things that sort of are important to me ethically, while sort of taking in this new information and maybe taking a different direction on the way that you see the world. And so that really spoke to me. I mean, when you strip down the post-apocalyptic elements and even the Boy Scout cult elements, this is really the story about a small conservative town and what happens to these people who don't fit in this kind of hyper masculine, rigid mold. And so that it is certainly my most spiritual book. Like I said, I'm still a practicing Jew. I consider it kind of my way of throwing a penny in the well of the universe, so to speak, and kind of my way of connecting with my ancestors and people who have died and people who haven't been able to practice their religion. But my journey has been very different than that of my parents, which was very different than that of their parents. And so that is something that I consider, no matter how you track spiritually, sort of the way you look at the universe, vis-a-vis your parents and your upbringing, that I think is a coming of age story that everybody can relate to. Mm-hmm. But that said, I think there were other things that I certainly drew from. The Catholic priest scandals was a big thing. My partner, she was raised Catholic, and she's not a member of the church anymore because she was so disillusioned by these revelations. She said to herself, how can I stay a part of this institution that has put such horrific things and kind of swept them under the rug? And so I kind of took my upbringing and Judaism and her disillusionment with Catholicism, and I kind of mashed them together. It's how, and the kid's really going to have to discover, how does she maintain her spiritual and ethical values while navigating this human institution that is flawed and corrupt and sinister? And that's not an easy path for anybody, especially when you're in the post-apocalyptic Colorado Badlands. So we really get to have our cake and eat it too, by taking kind of this spiritual, long, dark night of the soul, while also having this really cool post-apocalyptic action in the context of this Boy Scout cult. So it's just a lot of fun things to bounce off of, and still somehow remain true to myself. So it's been a really fun project to work on, for sure.
No, and I can certainly see that. It comes through in the writing. And, I kind of like what you mentioned there about how, it's kind of about, at a certain point, like, especially with everything that I think a lot of us are living nowadays, about rectifying reality with faith. And sometimes that isn't always easy to do.
Sure.
In fact, I would say a lot of the times it's quite difficult.
Sure.
So I guess one other thing that I did want to mention is that when I read Scout's Honor, I see it as being more of like a commentary on these kind of patriarchal structures. Absolutely. As opposed to being an outright condemnation of, let's say, organized religion, for example.
Yeah, I would say it's an anti-cult book, but it's not an anti-religion book.
No.
Kit, in many ways, she's a true believer. This cult has sort of deified the original Scout founder. We've sort of created an analog, Dr. Jefferson Hancock, and he's been turned into sort of a prophet messiah figure, because he brought the Ranger Scouts together, and those survival skills that he taught them wound up becoming very, very practical in the apocalypse. And it's one of those things. Faith can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can really give you that extra boost, that extra bit of strength, that extra bit of comfort to get over the finish line when everything else is empty in the tank. I know a lot of people who find a lot of comfort and direction in their faith, and it's sort of given them a framework to guide their lives, a way to add some meaning to a universe that often is lacking in such. On the other hand, anybody can look at a history book and know that religion has been used as an excuse for some really terrible atrocities. There's a lot of people who say, you can see it just on the news today, where they say, well, I go to church, and so I can basically do whatever I want. Jesus will forgive me. And that is, I didn't expect when I pitched this book for it to be so prescient, but as I dug into it, I realized I got why AfterShock went for it. And it's because, you look at our country today, sort of the culture of toxic masculinity, the rise of this evangelical thinking, the fetishizing of the military and survival prepping. You lock that in a cauldron for 200 years, throw a couple nuclear weapons, you don't have to squint too hard to see the Ranger Scouts. And Kit is really going to have to go through kind of the 5 stages a bit. Her faith gets rocked to the core by the end of the first issue. And her journey, unlike my other characters that kind of marinated in their trauma for a long time, Kit gets to kind of have her big exciting event happen in real time. And we get to watch her kind of scramble to figure out where she's going to go next. But at the same time, I think she's the most hopeful character I've ever written, because she believes that there is a better world around the corner, as long as there are people willing to fight for it. And, I wrote most of this book during lockdown. Just the way that the timing went from the initial pitch to when I signed my contract. I signed my contract 2 weeks before lockdown. And so I wrote issues 2 through 5 under lockdown. And I was really worried about the kind of energy I was putting out into the world, especially on the heels of the OZ, which is already a dystopian war story. The world seems post-apocalyptic enough as it is without me adding to it. And I'm glad that I kind of wrote through those fears and anxieties, because I realized that the strength of the post-apocalyptic genre is not about the bleak setting in which we start. It's about the redemptive arc out. How do we work our way out? How do we build ourselves back? How do we make a better world? How do we turn a corner? And turning a corner, it's just the start. It's obviously not a utopia yet, but I felt like by the time I finished writing this series, it reminded me we can turn a corner. And I feel like as dark as the world looks right now, I think that is the death throes of another cult. And I think we are in the process of turning a corner. And I think by the time that this last issue comes out, we will have all really turned a corner in a big way. And I think that ultimately, despite kind of the bleak eye concept, it gives me a level of hope and optimism that I didn't think I had.
And that's incredible to hear you say that. Arguably, in certainly the darkest chapter of yours and my living experience, that you were able to kind of find something that was so inspiring and motivating. It goes back to, I think, what you were saying too, that's really at the core of that whole dystopian genre, is that you're right, it isn't about the toxicity or the damage or or whatever you want to call it. It's really about finding that hope at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's what's the light at the end of the tunnel. And I mean, you can even boil it down to fiction in general, is that that's you're ultimately you're fighting for the light at the end of the tunnel. And yeah, you're going to put your characters through hell to get there, but ultimately you'll get there. I'm still a believer in happy endings. And I feel like that was sort of the one thing that I told myself in 2020, is that even if I would write dark stories, I would always try to write a happy ending, because I feel like we need it. And so but I also I think so much of this, again, growing up Jewish, it's a religion built on literary criticism. You have 5 different rabbis giving 10 different interpretations in the same passage, and then you keep all that apocryphal material in the margins. So the way I was raised with religion, it's a wide spectrum of practice, and I think that went into the world building of this book in a big way. Taking the post-apocalyptic tropes and taking the Boy Scout iconography and finding the religion in all of it. Something that I was really happy with in the first issue is I wrote bath matter in the book. And so I was able to really kind of flesh out the world even more with the Boy Scout or the Ranger Scout merit badges, which in a really cool promotion, AfterShock is actually offering those merit badges to stores that buy 20 copies or more of any of our covers. So it's very exciting. But things like, for example, the Explosives merit badge, where they say, the new world was born in an explosion. And so explosions can be these agents of change when nothing else can do it. But at the same time, they're obsessive about checking out things like blast wave radii and payload compositions, because they know that if they don't respect the bomb could turn on them next. And, part of the reason I went for this as a concept is because Howard Zinn talked about how history is written by the victors. Human beings like their continuity. And so, we build on these stories, and sometimes we mythologize them, sometimes we sanitize them. And then sometimes the mythology kind of even bends back on itself. I mean, you look at Christopher Columbus as an example. It wasn't until fairly recently that people started being like, that guy committed genocide.
Yeah.
And so the idea that I had was this game of telephone that is our history. What happens if you just slice that game? What would we grab onto for continuity? What scraps of the old world? And then how would we build and mythologize on that? And so that's been the fun part about it, building this world, is you see the starting points from the Boy Scouts, but they've been distorted and mutated and stretched over the lens of time. And so things like, for example, the signature weapon of the Ranger Scouts, the switchblade, which for us, we think of like a little Swiss Army knife.
Yep.
For them, it is mutated into these giant Final Fantasy Buster swords that have sub-blades in the main blade, because, you've got something that's got to rip armor, and then you need a corkscrew, and you need a flamethrower component to start a fire. These are all things that, that tracks, especially to this cauldron of toxic masculinity, where, of course, they're going to say bigger is better. It's just been an interesting way at looking at our history and looking at kind of the world we live in now. And distorting it, but to be honest, not even distorting it that much.
Hmm.
And just kind of seeing like, oh, we could be pretty close to this dystopian world, but seeing that there is a way to navigate it as soon as we can sort of put a name to it, and as soon as we can really see it for what it is.
Hmm. And I agree with you, and I think that's what I like about it, or what I was really drawn to, and especially with the kind of merit badge points, because you're right, it doesn't seem like it's so far-fetched. It really just almost seems like you're writing from the other side of the mirror, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
And even going back to what you said about the switchblade,
Mhm.
you made a point, and I won't make you try to quote you or anything like that, but you made a point where you kind of said that there's, the moment where like a son gets that switchblade is like a very significant moment. It's the passage of boyhood into manhood.
Yep.
And for me, it almost, like, the first thing I thought about when I read that, to be quite honest, was me 10 years old fishing with my dad and him giving me his Swiss Army knife for the first
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was such like an honest and human moment, and something that I was like, wow, like, it's really neat to see how a future society might extrapolate from that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I had been thinking a lot about a bar mitzvah when I wrote that moment. And yeah, it's just, there are certain things, they talk about comparative religion for a reason. And it's because there are certain tropes, like the flood myth, for example, that, like, these exist across cultures, and they've mutated in different ways depending on, who is sort of worshiping it. Um, but yeah, it's also sort of, in this case, when it's almost a degree of arrested development,
Hmm.
you know, where you sort of take in these kind of tropes of your boyhood and you won't let them go.
Hmm.
And in this case, it's because, the environment has sort of forced that arrested development, where, history is gone, infrastructure is gone, and so everybody's just kind of scrapping to live. And so I understand why the Ranger Scouts would just focus on these sort of do or die here and now survival tactics. And yes, they focus on sort of passing it on to the next generation, but it's telling that 260 years later they haven't rebuilt.
Hmm.
um, you know the ruins of the old world still exist, and that's because they have been so consumed by the hunter gathering elements of it all. And that's because you learn these survival tactics, and it's the end of the world. It becomes self-fulfilling. Like, these things would help you if you once you've left the bunker. And so, why upset the apple cart when instead you could just lean into it and mythologize it and turn it into a religion? And that's why I really empathize with Scoutmaster Shepard, who's the cult leader of this book, and he's sort of the religious and political spearhead of the whole society. Is I He does do some sinister things, and but I get it. If his thinking is he wants to maintain the Scout way of life, the way that he was raised, the way that his father was raised, the way that he's raised his son, and also he sees that the choices is very binary, where it's either the Ranger Scout status quo or oblivion. And that's a real heavy weight to be on anybody's shoulders.
Hmm.
So I think that's the thing I've really enjoyed about this series, is that, like, they all have their reasons
Hmm.
for acting the way they do. We'll get to see in issue 2 exactly the moment that Kit decided to become a Ranger Scout.
Hmm.
Um, and we get to see, for example, her best friend Des, who's the Scoutmaster's son. He's got a really fun arc as kind of Kit's best friend turned bitter rival.
Hmm.
Um, he has secrets of his own. He and Kit, that's kind of the tragic thing about their friendship, is they are lifelong best friends who each have a big secret they haven't told the other.
Hmm.
And this big secret has kind of been the thing that's made them not quite fit in the Ranger Scout mold. And there's a real dramatic friction that comes with holding secrets, and that's the reason why. One of the reasons why I wanted, Kit to have a secret of her own. It's not anything sinister like the Ranger Scouts, but this idea of having to conceal a part of who you are, to always kind of have your guard up, and always trying to make sure that you don't slip. There's some sort of dramatic sparks that kind of come up from that, and there's a degree of empathy and sadness that comes from that. And Des is the same way. It'll be a minor spoiler, but we'll get to it in issue 2. You know, if things are hard for women in the society, how hard do you think it would be for a member of the LGBTQ community? And yeah, Dez, you know, when you strip him down, he's the closeted son of the pastor, and you know that's a hard way to live. And especially when he's trying so hard to live up to his father's expectations, and he constantly comes up second best to Kit. He's really the low key to Kit's Thor in that way. But again, there's something really poignant about him as a character, and so every time I've written him, I've really had a lot of fun because I get it. I understand where that bitterness comes from and that desire to sort of finally come out on top, because he knows at the end of the day that if his father really knew everything about him, that he'd never measure up. And that's tragic. You know, it shouldn't be that way. And I think that's something about this story too, is that it's hard to live your life authentically sometimes. There are people who spend their whole lives trying to get through that struggle. And so that I think makes these characters have a certain spark to them, because they really kind of have to find their way out of the darkness into living their own personal truths.
And I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I think that's one of the things that I've always been drawn to in your writing and in your characters, is that they are all these kind of perfectly imperfect, flawed people.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I like writing screwed up characters to some degree. You know, whether it's they've got a long-standing trauma in their past, or they've got sort of a big secret that they're holding, or yeah, you know, it's fun to have a little bit of messiness to your characters, and I think that makes them a little more relatable. For me, the question I'm always asking myself is, the question I really ask is, how do I make readers cry? But that really it spins off of the real question, which is, how do I make readers give a damn? And that's sort of the question I'm always asking myself, is like, if I can't make myself care, if there's nothing that's like kind of drawing that well of compassion from me, I can't expect that to come from you. And so I always love kind of tearjerker, sad stuff. I mean, I watch This Is Us every week. I love watching those sad triplets. You know, that show gets me every week. And so I'm always trying to kind of figure out, like, yes, there's the plot. There's sort of the A to B. Luke Skywalker has to blow up the Death Star. But I'm also kind of thinking, like, all right, what's the thing about them that's unhealthy? What's the thing that they believe about themselves that they shouldn't? Or that they believe about the world that they shouldn't? And or what's sort of the dysfunction or even the selfish quality? I think that's really the real meat of the story. It's that emotional arc. And that's the thing that kind of gives the plot arc its heft. But yeah, ultimately, if I can't find like the real emotional grist to work with, I usually let the script sit for a while, because I'm just like, oh, well, I'm not going to like writing this and you're not going to like reading it. So I really need to like sort of put it on ice for a while.
And that's an interesting way to approach it. I mean, it's really, it's insightful to kind of learn that is how that you would kind of care so much about the emotional response from your readers above all else. You know, you're not necessarily looking to be Dan Brown and make a movie into a book. You're looking to kind of create no knocks on Dan Brown. I mean,
no, but he can afford it.
Exactly.
Exactly. I feel like I want to get a response out of you. You know, that's really my ultimate thing. And to be honest, I would much rather it be a good or a bad reaction than no reaction. I think no reaction is like, I'm really not doing my job. Whereas like I would prefer if you don't like the book, it's at least in response to a choice, you know, that I've made. But yeah, I feel like having an emotional response is really, that's how you get a book some legs. That's how you engage an audience beyond the first issue. Because let's face it, like, you know, attrition is a thing. It's very, very, very rare, almost impossible for you to build readers on top of your first issue. And so I know there's going to be a drop no matter what. It's just gravity. It's just how it works. I want to kind of limit that, though, as much as possible. And so I think the two ways of doing that are trying to stay as consistent as you can with the pacing of it all and making sure every issue has its own hook. And then the other thing is, like you said, the emotional element to it.
Yeah.
If I can make you care about Kit and Des, then you've got a much greater chance of sticking around for issue 2.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't care and it's just forgettable, then like honestly, it's a waste of your money and my time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always kind of thinking, what's the emotional payoff here?
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong, like, you know, as somebody who's been optioned a few times, like I would love to have like a bigger, wider audience for the story, and sort of make that leap to multimedia.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not my like end goal.
Yeah.
That's just like, that's nice if it happens.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Los Angeles, and I get asked at least once a quarter by a screenwriter, how do I make a comic that we can then sell as IP? And I usually tell them, do you have $15,000 in 9 months? And usually that like kind of scares them off. But I mean, that's the thing, is that like, this is not like anybody who's trying to do comics so they can just springboard into IP. They've either got deeper pockets than I do, or more likely though, it's just, you know, their priorities are messed up. You
Mm-hmm.
see it in the final product that you're like, oh, that's not a comic. That's just somebody's pitch doc.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I would much rather tell the best comic I can, because paradoxically, you got to be zen about it. If you don't write for a multimedia deal, I honestly have found you're much more likely to get one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I find that the number one thing that Hollywood likes is, has your book gotten like buzz?
Mm-hmm.
Have people liked it?
Mm-hmm.
And that it all comes back to just write the best comic you can, and
Mm-hmm.
then, you know, if anything else comes out on the side, great, it's extra income. But ultimately, I'm a comics writer.
Yeah.
That's my job, and so I always make sure to write every comic like it's my last.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think more than ever before, it shows in Scout's honor. And I just wanted to circle back for a second to what
Yeah,
we were
please.
talking about with the with the merit badges, because
Yeah.
in my opinion, that adds like so when I was reading that, I learned that archery is a foundation of the Scouts. And then when I went back and I reread the comic for a second time, and I saw Kit with a bow and Des with a gun, I had a completely different kind of understanding as to how their dichotomy splits.
Yeah, it was, thank you. You know, it was such, I was so glad that I got the opportunity to write that, because you know, what's funny is, unlike, this series was very different in terms of the development process than anything I've ever done before. It's the first time that I've worked with editors. It's the first time that I have had to sort of churn out the story sequentially versus like kind of doing it in batch form.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was great about doing that back matter was the whole series had been written and illustrated at that point. So I was really able to kind of take a look back on everything that I had done. And, you know, there was, I think I probably had the most improv to this book than I have anything else, just because I was writing it under a fast deadline. I was writing it, you know, I had to send each issue sequentially to my editors for notes and approval, which would then go to my artist, Luca Casalanguida. And so it was one of those things. There are certain elements that kind of popped up
Mm-hmm.
as the series progressed that I was just like, oh yeah, that's an element of world building.
Mm-hmm.
The Switchblades, for example, I only kind of came up with that idea. We flesh it out at the beginning of the last issue. And thankfully Luca had not, he was in the middle of the first issue when I turned in my last script. And so I was able to say, hey, like, let's add some of these big buster swords to the Scouts. And then when I was given the opportunity, they were like, do you want to do some back matter? I said, oh, this is a win-win. Let's
Mm-hmm.
do, you know, we've got the merit badges. Let me tell it from Scoutmaster Shepard's perspective. And that way we get another way of sort of fleshing everything out while still being able to foreshadow elements of the plot. I don't think I'm spoiling too much by saying all these merit badges matter. All these merit badges count. They will all play out in this story in some capacity. So, but yeah, you know, it was the merit badges it was a fun way to world build, but to find the religion
Mm-hmm.
in all of it, and sort of find different angles of telling the story. And so I really give my editor, Christina Harrington, and Steve Rotterdam, the head of marketing over at AfterShock, a lot of credit, because that was sort of a brainchild that they came up with, of saying, like, let's offer merit badges. And I was like, great, I already had that idea in the script. Let's just, now everybody can get merit badges. And so I'm thrilled. I have a full set of Ranger Scout merit badges.
That's so cool.
I got a couple sets for me and my family. But yeah, it's another fun way of not just having extra engagement with our retailers, but just it's free story building pages. And so yeah, I had a lot of fun writing that, and it was just a really great way to sort of look back on this story that I kind of wrote in one mad dash, and sort of saying, oh yeah, this is where some of the threads come together, and this is where some of the imagery might pay off. And oh, this is an interesting way to see, like, oh, Dez steals their armored personnel carriers for joyrides at night. That sounds like something a teenage boy would do.
Yeah.
But even down to things like, the line about archery and how, yeah, it's a foundational skill for the Ranger Scouts, because it's much easier to kill somebody with a trigger. It's very different to have to pull the bow and do it with the strength of your own two hands. And that goes back to like Frank Miller Batman, where, guns are a coward's weapon. It's so much harder to do it with your hands. And so, yeah, I think for back matter, I think it's probably some of the best back matter I've written. And certainly I think the most important to the actual text.
Do you see yourself doing more of that in subsequent issues moving forward?
Not for Scouts Honor, although I believe we'll be doing it afterward, in which case I'll sort of be summing up my relationship with the book, especially sort of my upbringing. I was not a Boy Scout, but my younger brothers were, and sort of it was this outside looking in that really kind of helped shape the cult of all this. But yeah, it's something I've always toyed with. In fact, this is a little Easter egg that I don't think I've said in an interview before. I had originally, when I wrote Spencer and Locke, I had originally in my first issue written back matter. It was going to be other strips from the funny pages. And that's how we created Roach Riley, the villain of our second arc. That was something that I had written in the very first issue, in the back, in the first draft of my script. And I decided at the last minute, it's already hard enough to make a comic. Why go out of my way to commission like other strips?
Right.
And that was the kernel of the sequel was, oh yeah, let's just do all of the funny pages. And so yeah, back matter, it's something that there is so much back matter that's often useless. Like, not to be rude, but like it's just filler, And so I was really thrilled that we were able to kind of come at it at an angle that I thought was actually additive.
For sure.
And really kind of it justified that extra $1 price point for the book, and really just, for a book that's already heavy on world building, just really went like completely all in.
And I agree with you on that. It's just the right amount, because, not to name names, but there are definitely other authors who go the complete other end of the spectrum, and, a couple pages, fine. Yeah. Do I need 32 pages of...
No. I had seen, and, I hadn't thought about it until you just mentioned it, but a big influence also with my back matter, it's the X-Men line over at Marvel. And I've said to everybody who will listen, Jonathan Hickman's my favorite writer right now. His work has been really revolutionary. The superhero genre especially, it leans towards inertia. It goes back to status quo naturally. This feels like an actual new status quo that, like, in theory, if he stuck around long enough, could go the distance. And the idea of sort of how much he fleshes out the world through those data pages, that was certainly a big influence on the merit badge pages. Just to sort of be like, yeah, like, oh yeah, like, I love comics, but you can have these text breaks that sort of break up the action, and really sort of you wind up reading it, and it's important. And you say, oh, I feel like I know so much more about the world now. And so, yeah, Hickman and Company, I mean, I always say I'd love to be Hickman or Al Ewing when I grow up. I'd love to be like operating at that high of a level of skill and execution. And so, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally swiped from that playbook and like didn't even realize it until just now.
Honestly, I love that we are clearly thinking about the same guy, because I agree
Yeah,
with you. Hickman is just playing 4D chess and we're all playing
yeah,
checkers.
yeah, yeah.
But you know, I like I was saying, I think it's nice to kind of just a little touch of that, because I feel like it's such an underutilized thing. So
Sure.
not to kind of get redundant here, but I just love that. One other thing, just kind of a
Yeah,
little bit of a on a little bit of a lighter note here.
sure.
So we've got the Ranger Scout recruits.
Yep.
We've got the Yellow Brick Road Warriors.
Yep.
How do you come up with such just excellent punny nicknames for your fan base based on the title that you're releasing at the moment? Is it
I
just
grew
quick? Do
up.
you just
I came by it honestly. My father is big into puns. I'm actually an actual Punderdome champion. It's a monthly pun competition in New York.
I
I've
need to know
actually
more about this clearly.
yeah yeah Punderdome 3000. They do a competition every month. Now they're doing them online. But I won 1 month. So like I come by it honestly. Yeah, you know what's funny is yeah, the Ranger Scout recruits and Yellow Brick Road Warriors was funny. That came out of just pure desperation, like spur of the moment. I had spent like a month building my Kickstarter campaign, and like obviously it was like the day that the thing launched that I was just like Yellow Brick Road Warriors, and I was like, oh, you idiot! Why didn't you think of that like a month ago? Um, yeah, and you know, I just it's been fun. You know, people seem to really respond to it. And yeah, it's definitely something I want to keep trying to do for future series if it works out. I think also with the OZ and Scouts Honor in particular, there's something inherent about, you know, we're better together than we are alone, to steal from Donny Cates. And so the idea of having like a nickname for our readership really resonates to the theme of the book. I don't know if like Spencer and Locke, for example, where it is really kind of like, yeah, they are better together than they are alone, but there's only two of them
Mhm,
inherently. Or
mhm,
even like, you know, the Bad Elvis gang in Going to the Chapel. Um, you know, like that doesn't necessarily lend itself as well to a story about a group.
mhm.
But yeah, the OZ, sort of that Emerald Army, and especially our Ranger Scout recruits. Yeah, it's just been you spend enough time on the internet that like you have to like keep thinking of like, what do I say that's not the same thing over and over again? And every so often you luck into something good. But yeah, I'm a big believer that like puns and idioms, like if I don't have a good one of those for a title, I usually have to like think pretty long and hard about it. Like Spencer and Locke worked just because they're philosophers
Mhm,
alongside, you know, Calvin and Hobbes.
mhm.
And Going to the Chapel worked as just as a song lyric. But yeah, like the OZ was a pun. You know, even Scouts Honors an idiom. Grand Theft Astro, you know, is kind of just a riff on a common phrase. And if I can't find something like that, usually that is a pretty good sign for me that the pitch is not ready for prime time.
Mhm.
So I spend a lot of time with a Google Doc open and like a thesaurus, and I'm trying to remember the site that like has words related to other words, and I just spend a lot of time, an ungodly amount of time. It's those two sites and baby name sites. I spend way too much time on all of those, trying to figure out just the right name for something, because I really do think that that's the thing people remember.
Mhm.
And you know, and it doesn't just help for like Google searches, although it does a bit. But yeah, having the right title, and that kind of goes to, you know, having the right name for your fan base. It really can help in a big and demonstrable way.
Mhm. And I agree, and I think it creates a sense of community, like you were saying, like or camaraderie. And I think
Yeah,
that that is really, especially for the foreseeable future, where you know cons are out the window, meet and greets with fans are non-existent, unfortunately, and realistically, we don't really know when they're going to come back. So
yeah,
I think that someone who's able to kind of just even something so small like that, like I
yeah,
can tell you from the other side of the kind of mirror there, it resonates, and it is something that is kind of felt and appreciated.
yeah,
Um, Even going back to what we were talking about with the fact that you're sending out merit badges, like just the tactile collector's element to it,
yeah,
it's just something that is enticing the audience, which in my opinion, from a consumer's perspective, is what separates the good from the great, especially nowadays.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like, and it's helpful that sort of the bigger the platform, the more the easier I'm able to do it. Because yeah, like, and no knocks on them, but like, at a place like Action Lab, it's pretty small. There's not really the bandwidth or even the or the financial wiggle room to be doing a lot of fun add-ons. I mean, I remember looking up very briefly if there was a way to do like Elvis masks, even to bring them at cons, and I just realized it wasn't cost effective and I couldn't bring them with me. But yeah, things like the patches or our enamel pins with the OZ or our Winged Monkey Squadron stickers. Yeah, I have found, especially once you sort of are operating at a bigger platform like that, either with a big Kickstarter or at a place like AfterShock, yeah, like it's just, it's a fun little collectible. It's something that just shows we're willing to go the extra mile, and it's something extra for retailers that they can sell, or it's a way for them to sort of tip a sale over the net. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think a lot about sort of how do you sell my books, and I think if I have a strength, it's that I can boil my stuff down pretty fast, so it's an easy sell. But having say, oh well, listen, if you order 20 copies of Scout's Honor, which a lot of places are probably ordering, maybe 15 copies, so an extra 5 is not going to kill them. Saying, hey, listen, if you order 20, we're going to give you some Ranger Scout badges. We're going to give you a couple incentive covers. That's like a nice way of sort of sweetening the pot and giving retailers a little bit more room to maneuver. And it's tough out there. We all kind of have to stick together. I think only with retailers and creators and publishers having each other's backs, that's really the only way we're going to sort of weather out the craziness of the pandemic and the economy and Brexit. And hopefully not just sort of weather through the storm, but be able to kind of shore up our numbers a little bit, a way to sort of reach out to the diaspora of readers that maybe have gone to Webtoons or Kickstarter or Amazon, or, God forbid, even some of the pirates who, haven't been buying stuff. How do we bring them back to the table a bit? And I think, yeah, the Ranger Scout badges is one of many ways that I think we can do that.
No, and I agree with you. And like I said, I'm unfortunately my LCS was slack and didn't order enough, but I need to get on AfterShock and get myself a set of those ASAP, because those are just too cool.
Say, AfterShock, email them, especially if you're a retailer, because there are a lot of retailers who said, oh, we didn't realize that they were offering this. And so we do have some more of the first 2 Ranger Scout badges. I believe it was Wilderness Survival and Recon badges that we have for this first issue. But like I said, we're going to have 14 of these. So we will be doing plenty of these badges. Every single badge in the back matter will be available.
Excellent.
So we've got a lot of fun stuff coming. But yeah, tell your local comic shop to call up AfterShock, and they'll be able to sort of walk them through eligibility and what it takes to get them. I wish I was privy to it, otherwise I would just say it here on the podcast. But yeah, I know at least for the first issue it was 20 copies, and I know they will have a certain sales threshold for all the other issues. I don't know if it's 20 or something else. But yes, you will be able to get those merit badges for sure, because yeah, I think even AfterShock didn't realize how excited people were going to be about those, because from all accounts, our numbers spiked in the final order cutoff window. So yeah, I think a lot of stores slept on it, and now they're reordering really fast.
Now we're getting kind of close to the end here, and I don't want to eat up too much of your time. I do want to just ask one more thing, and then we'll have you out and enjoying your evening. But I would say that one of the things that I enjoy the most about your writing is you are a master at kind of creating these what if kind of stories. Like when I read Spencer and Locke, it's kind of very, and I am the Bill Watterson fan. Like I have every single Calvin and Hobbes book that's ever been published. So I mean, it wasn't hard for me to draw that parallel and be like, oh, this is what would happen if Calvin grew up and became a cop with Hobbes, for lack of a better word. The OZ was kind of what would happen if Dorothy had a granddaughter and she went back to Oz. What does Oz now look like since she has been gone?
Yeah.
And, you know, again, with Scout's Honor, it's kind of, if we're to extrapolate, it's what would have happened if humanity, instead of following the teachings of the Bible,
Yeah.
found another text. And let's say, what if it could have been the Boy Scout Book of America, and what might that world look like?
Sure.
Where I'm going with this very long and drawn out question
Yeah.
is there any other story in existence, or do you see yourself looking at, I don't know, the Power Rangers or DuckTales, or just anything that inspires you or has inspired you over the years that you would like to be like, you know what, I could put a really cool twist on this if I kind of sat down and put pen to paper?
There's a few. It's funny you mentioned Power Rangers, because I actually did a Power Rangers short called Die Die Danger Ronin. It's in the pages of the Nightmare Theater horror anthology. But I basically did what if Power Rangers went head to head with The Walking Dead. Sort of what happens to the last Power Ranger when the zombies have taken over. So yeah, there are a few. I mean, honestly, it's funny. Some of them, are actually like, I'd love to tackle Archie horror, and that's like actually licensed. Poor Alex Segura over there has to listen to me like quarterly email him being like, hey, is there any room? Is there any room? Because that's like my bucket list. One of my bucket list items as a comics creator. Things like I got a fun riff on the Jetsons that I'd love to do. I wish DC was still kind of doing their kind of dark Hanna-Barbera stuff, because I have a take on the Jetsons that would be really fun. I'd love to bring Captain Planet back into the 21st century. That's like my white whale.
That would be insane.
I tell every publisher that'll listen, if you get the rights to Captain Planet and you don't call me, I'm never going to forgive you, because like I've got like a pitch it's like the first Avengers movie meets Avatar: The Last Airbender. Just it doesn't take a whole lot of polishing to make that very modern and very timely. I got a Harry Potter riff that I'm sort of workshopping now that would be kind of fun. But yeah, I feel like I'm at the point in my career where like the straight adaptations I kind of want to save, unless it's like something big like Spencer and Locke or the OZ, where I know it's not going to be a base hit. It's going to be like I'm going for a grand slam. But that said, I'm always trying to riff on like just real life stuff, or what's some piece of fiction that really appeals to me. I've got a riff on Groundhog Day that I'm really excited about, that I've been shopping around. So often it's just every time I write a script, I have like a bucket list going in and I check a bunch of items off, but usually I've added more on just in response to what I've just written. And sometimes if I watch something that like really kind of strikes me as interesting, I usually say, that's a cool trick. How can I incorporate that trick? And so last I checked my to-do list of pitches, I think I had 10 or 12, just as of like this morning. And so that's a long to-do list, and a lot of them, I mean, all of them, I think, stem from kind of this what if, or what's the weirdest thing that. Yeah, I think that's just kind of the way that I do things. So, somebody said that I do interesting things with continuity, and I think I like to say that I either hop in between the gaps of continuity, or I like to kind of poke holes at stuff and just be like, well, that doesn't make sense, and then just follow it and see where it goes, because often there's like a cool way to kind of reconcile all that. But yeah, ultimately, I think of weird stuff all the time, and my poor friends and family have to like listen to me bombard them with stupid pitches, and half the time they're just like, dude, you just invented the Matrix, or you just invented Moon Knight. But every so often I'll sort of have an idea and they'll be like, oh, that's interesting. Like that does sound like the pineapple pizza idea or the Reese's peanut butter cup idea. Two great tastes, you throw them together. And ultimately, if I can do that, and my sort of initial brain trust starts kind of being like, yeah, that sounds cool. Then I'm like, all right, let's file this away into the to-do list. And as far as that's going, I mean, that's given me another 5 years worth of books to write. So it's the right kind of busy.
That's good, and that's what we like to hear. And I know I said that it was going to be my last question, but just because I hear and if I didn't ask this, a lot of people would be upset with me. How is Ruby doing?
She's great. She's our new puppy Ruby is she's 4 months old. She's actually supposed to be getting I think either the last of her shots or the second to last of her shots on Friday. She's great. She gets mad whenever I do podcasts. That's why I'm in my office right now, in my living room. She gets very territorial when she senses that I'm paying somebody else attention instead of her. But she's a sweet girl. She's learning how to sit and stay, and she's litter box trained, so I consider her a prodigy.
There you go.
But yeah, no, super sweet dog. I don't have her here in this room, obviously, because if I did, I would never be able to answer a single question. But yeah, she's doing fine and adjusting nicely to apartment living. So thank you for asking.
You're very welcome. And on that note, we're going to say goodnight to David Pepose. David, it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, and hopefully we'll have you back maybe once the first arc wraps so we can discuss more about Scout's Honor. Make sure to get out to your local comic book store to pick it up if you haven't already. The book is Scout's Honor. Follow at Pepose on Twitter and on Instagram, correct?
Yep.
That's the same handle? Yeah.
Yeah, so. And you can follow me on Facebook at David Pepose Comics, or subscribe to my newsletter Pep Talks at bit.ly/pepnews.
Excellent. David Pepose, thank you, and you have a great evening.
Thank you, you too.